Welcome to Life of a Pharaoh. From the pyramids to the Nile, come see how I greet the sun. Gold oils, lotus baths, and a kingdom that never sleeps.
Hey guys, tonight we're stepping right into the world of ancient Egypt, where your morning begins not with an alarm clock, but with the first blush of sunlight spilling across the Nile. Imagine it. You open your eyes to a soft golden glow, the river shimmering like liquid glass, and a gentle breeze sneaking in through your carved stone windows. Somewhere outside, a heron lets out a lazy cry, and the palace slowly stirs awake. Servants pad through the corridors on bare feet, carrying clay jars of water and woven baskets of offerings, their movements as quiet as the river's current. The world smells faintly of wet earth and burning incense from last night's rituals. And if you're not a morning person, well, tough luck. As Pharaoh, you don't get to hit snooze. You stretch beneath linen sheets that are surprisingly soft for 1300 BCE, and reality hits. You probably wouldn't survive this morning routine without serious help from your army of attendants. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise slowly, the stone floor cool under your feet, and head toward the balcony overlooking the Nile. The Nile stretches endlessly, flanked by dark green reeds and sandy banks that catch the first sunlight like gold dust. Historians still argue whether pharaohs actually started their day this serenely or were immediately bombarded with matters of state, but for now, you're soaking in the peace. Somewhere in the courtyard, a gardener tends to lotus flowers floating in a small pool. The blossoms open with the sun, releasing a faint sweetness into the air. Fun fact, the lotus wasn't just pretty, it symbolized rebirth, which is kind of perfect for someone who's expected to embody eternal life. Fringe scholars even claim that certain Egyptian morning rituals were timed to the lotus blooming, though nobody's 100% sure. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with a mix of desert air, river mist, and that faint aroma of temple incense carried by the wind. In the distance, a pair of fishermen cast their nets, their silhouettes moving like puppets in the rising light. Life along the Nile pulses with quiet activity, and you can almost feel the river whispering its eternal promise. Everything flows, everything renews. A servant arrives with a carved wooden stool, gesturing politely for you to sit as your attendants prepare the first ritual of the morning. The day hasn't officially begun until the God King is presentable for both humans and deities. For now, though, you linger on the balcony, tracing the reflection of clouds in the water, letting the soft warmth of sunrise sink into your bones. And if you're wondering, yes, there's still a lot more to do before breakfast, but this moment, this is the closest thing a pharaoh gets to me time. The river breeze follows you inside as servants approach, arms full of jars and linen towels. This is your version of a morning shower, minus the plumbing and plus a little drama. A young attendant kneels with a wide copper basin and another tilted jar to pour fresh Nile water over your hands. The first splash is shockingly cold, and you flinch a little, which would be embarrassing if anyone here dared to laugh. The water smells faintly of silt and reeds, a reminder that this is life flowing straight from the heart of Egypt. You cup your hands and splash your face, letting the chill jolt you awake faster than any modern iced coffee could. Historians still argue whether pharaohs preferred warm or cold water for their morning wash. Some say cold symbolized alertness and purity, while others claimed warm water was a luxury reserved for slower starts. Fringe theories even suggest certain ceremonial mornings included a dunk in the Nile itself. Talk about commitment. Servants methodically dry your face and hands with linen towels that feel smooth and cool, almost like silk. You catch your reflection in a polished bronze mirror, water droplets glinting in the dim light. Your hair is a royal mess. Nothing a little oil won't fix later, but right now you look more sleepy mortal than divine ruler. Fun fact, the Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness. Bathing multiple times a day wasn't just about hygiene, it was tied to religious purity. Priests were known to shave their entire bodies and bathe frequently, and pharaohs were no different in treating the morning wash as both a reset and a ritual. Fringe scholars sometimes joke that ancient Egypt invented the spa influencer vibe thousands of years before Instagram. As water runs over your arms, you hear distant palace noises, the scrape of amphorae being moved, low murmurs of guards changing shifts, and somewhere the impatient bray of a donkey who clearly didn't get the divine silence memo. The Nile continues its quiet conversation with the wind, and sunlight creeps further across the floor, turning the stone tiles golden. You take one last splash, savoring the bracing shock, and step back as the attendants whisk away the basins. Your skin tingles in the cool morning air, and for the first time today, you feel truly awake. Somewhere deep in your mind, you know the weight of rulership waits just around the corner, but for now, you're just a person rinsing off the dreams of the night. Next comes the fun part: perfumes, oils, and that infamous crocodile sunscreen you'd rather not think too hard about.
The attendants return, their arms heavy with trays of small alabaster jars and carved wooden spatulas. This is where your transformation from sleepy mortal to shimmering god on earth begins. The first jar opens with a faint pop, releasing the scent of sweet almond and lotus oil. Another is thicker, darker, with the unmistakable tang of animal fat infused with herbs, a mixture meant to both moisturize and, allegedly, repel insects. They start by dabbing warm oil along your arms and shoulders, rubbing it in with circular motions. Your skin drinks it up after yesterday's relentless sun. You can't help but notice a little shine catching the morning light, and unintentional glow-up courtesy of 18th Dynasty skincare. Historians still argue whether these oils were purely cosmetic or if they offered some sun protection. Fringe theories claim that pharaohs had personal blends of oil considered magically protective against both burns and evil spirits. And then comes the jar you've been dreading, the crocodile dung concoction. Yes, this was an actual part of some ancient beauty and fertility rituals. Supposedly, mixed with honey and mud, it worked as a primitive sunscreen, or at least that's the claim. You try not to think about it as the attendant carefully pats a thin layer along your back and shoulders. A whiff of the Nile creeps in through the balcony, mercifully diluting the aroma of, well, reptile contributions. Fun fact, crocodile dung was also used in some early contraceptive practices according to certain texts. Historians still debate whether that was symbolic or genuinely believed to work. You can't help but chuckle at the thought. Being pharaoh doesn't make you immune to bad ideas. Once the oils and enhancements are applied, another attendant brings out perfumed cones made of scented wax. They press one gently into your wig, where it will melt slowly throughout the day, keeping you fragrant. You catch hints of myrrh and cinnamon curling into the morning air, battling valiantly against that crocodile musk. The final touch is a sweep of kohl around your eyes. It feels cool as it's applied, and your reflection in the polished bronze mirror finally begins to match the image of a ruler rather than a bleary human dragged out of bed. Historians note that kohl wasn't just cosmetic, it helped reduce glare from the sun and may have had antibacterial properties. So yes, you're basically doing eye makeup and sun protection in one stroke. As the attendants step back, you can feel the transformation taking hold. The oils catch the early light, the subtle perfume wraps around you, and the armor of ritual make you ready for the day ahead. The only thing missing is breakfast, and maybe a breeze strong enough to chase away that reptilian undertone still haunting your shoulders.
With your skin glistening under the soft morning light and the perfume cone beginning its slow melt, it's time to move toward the temple for the first duty of the day, morning offerings to the gods. The palace corridors are cool and dim, echoing softly with your footsteps and the distant swish of attendants' linen garments. You exit into a courtyard where the sun now sits just above the horizon, painting the Nile and surrounding sands in shimmering gold. The temple complex looms ahead, its columns carved with scenes of gods and kings in poses that make your own morning stretches seem lazy. Incense smoke curls upward from bronze censers, blending with the faint, sweet smell of blooming lotus flowers. Historians still argue whether pharaohs performed all these rituals personally or simply supervised, but the record shows that being the living Horus came with at least symbolic participation. You stepped forward to present the first offering of the day, small baskets of bread, figs, and honey, plus a cut of roasted goose that still glistens from the cook's fire. One priest bows deeply as another lights the ritual flame, while a third begins a chant that resonates off the temple's stone walls. The sound is hypnotic, bouncing between low humming and rhythmic syllables. You feel the weight of the moment as you raise your hands briefly in acknowledgement, then place a pinch of natron salt on the altar, a gesture of purification. A soft breeze sweeps through the columns, scattering the scent of incense over you like an invisible blessing. Fun fact, the Egyptians believed offerings fed the gods, though not in the literal sense. It was more about maintaining ma'at, universal harmony. Fringe scholars sometimes argue that offerings also served as political theater, demonstrating the pharaoh's role as the essential bridge between divine and earthly order. As the priests continue their slow chant, you take a brief mental detour. The roasted goose smells incredible, and your stomach growls in betrayal. You make a mental note to ask for a portion of honeyed bread when you finally get back inside. The ritual concludes with the ringing of a small sistrum, a handheld rattle sacred to Hathor. Its metallic chime blends with birdsong and the distant splash of a fisherman's oar in the Nile, creating a serene soundtrack to start the day. As you step away, the sunlight catches the gold of your jewelry and the sheen of your oiled skin, and for a fleeting moment, you almost believe the divine illusion yourself. Walking back toward the palace, you can feel the day's rhythm building. Breakfast is near, but before food comes a dose of whispered advice from the ever-watchful priests. And knowing them, it's probably a mix of spiritual guidance and light palace gossip. The moment you leave the temple, a pair of priests follows in your shadow like linen-clad whispers. They are the early morning advisors, men who know the delicate balance between divine duty and palace politics. Their sandaled feet make almost no sound as they glide across the polished stone floor, and every so often, one leans in just close enough to murmur in your ear. The first whisper is about the gods, always the gods. The ibis birds have nested on the eastern bank, he says, eyes darting skyward as if the observation itself is holy. Surely Thoth is pleased. You nod solemnly, because when a man wearing a perfumed leopard skin sash tells you the bird god is pleased, you nod. Historians still argue whether these little divine updates were genuine observations or subtle nudges to shape the pharaoh's mood for the day. The second whisper slides neatly into palace gossip. The bakers sent too few honey loaves for the temple offering, another priest murmurs, a twinkle of drama in his eye. We have reminded him of his duty. You catch the subtext. In a world where every act is sacred theater, even bread counts as politics. Fringe theories suggest that priests used these moments to manipulate palace life, positioning themselves as the invisible hand behind daily order. As you walk, the temple's lingering incense clings to your oiled skin. The contrast between ritual calm and the subtle tension of whispered politics is oddly comforting. You're fully awake now, part king, part reluctant audience to the morning's sacred soap opera. You pass a column where sunlight filters through carved lotus designs, projecting soft patterns on the floor. A scribe appears from nowhere, handing a small clay tablet with a note about an upcoming Nile inspection. You tuck the knowledge away, nodding as if you had planned it all along. Being Pharaoh is 50% ceremony, 50% pretending you expected everything. Fun fact, priests weren't just spiritual figures. They were also administrators, astronomers, and political strategists. Some fringe historians even joke that pharaohs were project managers with extra eyeliner, constantly juggling rituals and resource management. By the time you reach the inner courtyard again, the whispers have slowed, replaced by the sound of morning activity, pottery clinking in the kitchens, the thud of sandals against stone, and somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable bray of that same opinionated donkey from earlier. The palace is fully awake, and so are you, primed with a mix of divine affirmation and carefully delivered palace intel. And just in time, too, because the smell of warm bread and fresh figs wafts through the air. Breakfast is calling, and after all this ceremony, your stomach isn't interested in waiting for divine approval.
At last, breakfast. After a morning of incense, cold water shocks, and priestly whispers, the scent of warm bread and honey is irresistible. You follow the smell into a shaded courtyard where a small wooden table has been set with the first meal of the day. The stone floor is still cool underfoot, and sunlight filters through a lattice of palm fronds, dappling the space in shifting gold. On the table, round loaves of emmer bread still warm from the oven, small bowls of figs and dates glistening with their own syrupy sweetness, and a wedge of soft white cheese. A cup of beer, more like a thick, slightly sour smoothie than the golden stuff in modern pubs, waits at your elbow. Historians still argue whether beer was truly a breakfast staple for pharaohs or reserved for laborers, but it's here now, and honestly, it's not the worst morning pick-me-up. You tear off a piece of bread and dip it in honey. The sweetness hits immediately, rich and almost floral, clinging to your fingers. You pair it with a soft bite of cheese, and for a moment it's just you and the simple joy of ancient carbs. Fun fact, Egyptian honey was so valued that some beekeepers were buried with their hives, and honey itself was often used as an offering to the gods, and as medicine for everything from sore throats to wounds. A servant fans you lazily with a palm frond, the faint whoosh syncing with the distant lap of the Nile. A second servant carefully pours more beer into your cup, managing not to spill a drop despite the breeze. You lean back and take in the scene. Ducks waddle near the garden pond, a cat slinks along the wall eyeing a pigeon with bad intentions, and somewhere nearby, a cook is scolding an apprentice for burning a loaf. Between bites, an attendant reminds you of the next task, the oracle visit. You roll your eyes internally because cryptic predictions before mid-morning can test anyone's patience. Historians still debate whether oracles genuinely influenced state decisions or were more ceremonial flair. Fringe theory suggests that some priests might have tailored prophecies based on palace gossip, a sort of ancient morning news with extra mystery. You pop a fig into your mouth and let the sticky sweetness melt on your tongue. For a brief moment, you forget the weight of crowns and temples, losing yourself in the rhythm of chewing and the soft coo of doves in the rafters. Morning in Egypt might be wrapped in ceremony, but breakfast is a rare slice of calm, warm, sweet, and human. And then, of course,
someone has to ruin it by announcing, "The oracle is ready for your arrival." You sigh, brush crumbs from your lap, and prepare to trade figs for vague cosmic riddles.
You rise from the breakfast courtyard with sticky fingers and a slightly honey-smeared smile, only to be immediately ushered toward the small temple annex where the oracle waits. The air changes as you walk down the shaded corridor, cooler, quieter, and carrying that particular mix of stone dust and incense that seems to whisper, "Behave yourself, mortal king." The oracle chamber is dim, lit only by a few oil lamps that throw wobbling shadows onto painted walls of falcons, jackals, and gods with inscrutable expressions. A priestess kneels before a low altar, her shaven head reflecting the light, and she holds a bundle of burning herbs that smell somewhere between mint and something your modern nose would call mysterious smoke shop. She begins the ritual without so much as a "good morning." Soft chanting fills the room, and a sistrum, a metal rattle, rings slowly. You take your seat on a small gilded stool and wait for the cosmic wisdom to arrive, though part of you is still thinking about figs. Historians still argue about how oracles operated in daily life. Some believe the priestess entered a meditative trance, interpreting subtle omens from smoke, water ripples, or even the way sacred animals behaved. Fringe theories, of course, imagine more dramatic setups, hidden tunnels, whispered prompts from priests, or carefully staged theatrics meant to steer your decisions in politically convenient directions. The priestess sways and speaks, her voice low and rhythmic. The falcon soars, the river carries, and the lotus blooms. But beware the shadow in the southern wind. You nod like it all makes sense, which, frankly, it doesn't. But this is the job. Your inner monologue is somewhere between "I am the chosen of the gods" and "What shadow? Is this about taxes again?" A servant carefully records the prophecy on a small papyrus scroll. Later, your advisors will spend hours debating whether southern wind means an actual weather pattern, a rebellious governor, or a crocodile with attitude. For now, you accept the omen with solemn dignity, even as a small part of you wonders if this is the ancient version of a horoscope column. Fun fact, oracles were sometimes consulted before major festivals, military campaigns, or even building projects. One French story claims that a delayed temple construction was blamed on a west wind spirit throwing a tantrum, which sounds suspiciously like a supply chain problem with divine branding. As the ritual concludes, the priestess sprinkles water onto the floor, creating tiny ripples that catch the lamplight. She bows deeply, signaling that the gods have spoken, or at least that breakfast digestion is now accompanied by vague foreboding. You rise, thanked with another waft of incense, and step back into the morning sun. The light feels sharper now, the Nile glinting like liquid bronze. Whatever the oracle meant, the day rolls on, and your next destination is blessedly free of cryptic shadows, the palace gardens. You step out into the palace gardens, and it feels like walking into a painting. The heavy, echoing corridors of stone give way to soft paths of sand and crushed shell, bordered by papyrus stalks and lotus ponds that shimmer like polished glass. A light breeze stirs the tall reeds, and the scent of blooming jasmine and lotus drifts lazily through the air. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks, making a sound that feels almost like the garden is clearing its throat in approval. You stroll slowly, your linen garments swishing against your oiled skin. Birds flit between branches, and a pair of ibises pick delicately along the water's edge, probably hunting for unlucky fish. The Nile lies just beyond the walls, and its calm rhythm seems to echo in every rustling leaf and ripple in the pond. Historians still argue whether these palace gardens were primarily for leisure or symbolic ritual. Some see them as living representations of order and prosperity, reflecting the balance of Ma'at. Fringe theories suggest certain garden layouts functioned as private message boards, where which plants bloomed and where certain animals were placed conveyed subtle political signals to visiting dignitaries. A servant kneels to show you a new lotus bloom, its petals pale blue and slightly damp with morning dew. Fun fact: lotus flowers were so tied to rebirth in Egyptian culture that they were often depicted emerging from the primordial waters of creation. And yes, occasionally nobles would have them floating in their wine cups, because apparently symbolism pairs well with day drinking. You take a seat on a small stone bench near a trickling fountain. A gardener moves silently in the background, pruning a palm with careful strokes. The palace cats lounge in sunny spots, tails flicking lazily as if guarding the garden from spiritual intruders, or just sunbathing professionals at work. From this shaded corner, the world seems far away. The court politics, the cryptic oracle warnings, even the faint whiff of crocodile dung oil from earlier all seem to fade into the floral air. You can feel your breathing slow. Maybe it's the stillness of the water, or maybe it's the sheer hypnotic effect of frogs, birds, and bees going about their tiny royal business. As you rise to leave, you take one last glance at the pond where your reflection wobbles gently among floating lotus blooms. This little oasis has given you something temples and feasts can't: a pocket of quiet, a soft reset button for the soul. But the day is calling, and next comes the part of your routine that no one envies: morning bureaucracy with the scribes.
You leave the cool, fragrant sanctuary of the garden and step into the scribe hall, where peace evaporates like morning mist. The room smells of papyrus, ink, and a faint undertone of stressed-out civil servants. Long wooden tables line the space, and scribes sit cross-legged, their reed pens scratching with a rhythm that sounds like dry rain on stone. The first stack of papyrus waiting for you looks less like royal correspondence and more like the aftermath of a tax season explosion. Lists of grain tallies, temple donations, and the ever-present reminders that the fishermen in the East Canal underreported their catch again await your signature, or at least your royal nod. Historians still argue how much of this paperwork Pharaohs personally engaged with. Some scholars think kings handled only ceremonial approvals, while fringe theories imagine micromanaging pharaohs furiously editing tax records with their own reed pens. A scribe approaches, bowing so low his forehead almost kisses the floor. He unfurls a scroll detailing the status of a recent shipment of limestone blocks for a minor temple renovation. Your eyes glaze for a moment. Limestone, barges, ropes, repeat. You give a slow, solemn nod that basically says, yes, I, living God, have acknowledged rocks exist. Fun fact, scribes were some of the most educated people in Egypt. Their job security was legendary because, let's be honest, not everyone wants to sit in the heat all day writing about barley quotas and goose inventories. Fringe stories claim that some scribes slipped in personal doodles or inside jokes between lines of accounting, a subtle rebellion against eternal paperwork. The room is warm, and the only breeze comes from a nervous servant fanning you from the side. You spot a small ink blot on a papyrus meant for temple records. The scribe freezes, as if expecting divine thunder to strike. Instead, you let out a small chuckle, which ripples through the room like a cautious exhale. In this hall of eternal bureaucracy, laughter is rarer than gold. Time stretches as you nod at more scrolls and approve more allocations: grain for temple festivals, papyrus shipments for the library, and rations for the laborers who will spend all day moving stone under the merciless sun. The work is dull, but necessary. Without this invisible machinery, the kingdom's divine facade would crumble faster than an old mud brick wall. Finally, a head scribe clears his throat to announce that the last document of the morning has been reviewed. You rise, legs a little stiff from sitting too long, and feel an unexpected surge of relief. Your morning of bread, lotus, and divine perfume has officially collided with the reality of government, and somehow you survived. Next on the agenda is far more appealing: a trip down to the river to inspect Nile boats and supplies. A little sunshine and a gentle breeze sound like the perfect antidote to papyrus fatigue.
The shift from the dim, papyrus-scented scribe hall to the open riverbank is like stepping from one world into another. The air is bright and alive with the mingled smells of wet reeds, fish, and the faint tar from boat caulking. Sunlight dances on the Nile's ripples, and the soft hiss of water lapping against wooden hulls becomes the soundtrack of your late morning. You stroll down the small dock where several boats are moored. Some are simple papyrus skiffs, nimble and light, perfect for fishing. Others are larger wooden vessels, their sails neatly furled, ready for cargo or ceremonial trips. You run your fingers along the polished wood of one hull, feeling the warmth from the sun soaking into it. Historians still argue whether pharaohs personally inspected these boats, or if this was mostly ceremonial. Fringe theories love the idea that pharaohs were secret boat enthusiasts, sneaking in mini joyrides between official inspections. A crew leader kneels before you, explaining that the latest cargo includes grain bound for Memphis, baskets of dried fish, and a shipment of papyrus reeds harvested upriver. You nod, taking in the rows of clay amphorae stacked neatly on deck, their stoppers sealed with mud and straw. A faint smell of beer and honey wafts from one of the cargo boats, because in Egypt, moving liquid bread was basically a national pastime. Fun fact, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the country's main highway. Boats transported everything: stone for temples, cattle, produce, and sometimes entire obelisks weighing hundreds of tons. Fringe scholars argue that pharaohs might have developed a near-spiritual attachment to their fleets, treating the river inspections as moments to reaffirm the kingdom's lifeblood. As you watch, a fisherman in a small skiff tosses a net with a fluid motion, and the sun catches the water droplets like a spray of tiny jewels. A child on the shore laughs, chasing a strayed duck that clearly wants no part in royal inspection day. The entire riverbank hums with life, people, animals, and the Nile itself working together in eternal rhythm. You pause to breathe in the river air. It smells both fresh and earthy, carrying the promise of abundance. Somewhere behind you, a servant whispers that the sun is climbing higher and the heat is building. A short siesta might be in order before the rest of the day's duties. The thought of shade and a brief escape from sunlight sounds perfect. You take one last look at the boats, their reflections shimmering on the slow-moving water. The Nile has carried Egypt's lifeblood for centuries, and today, as in every day of your reign, it carries your kingdom forward, quiet and unstoppable.
By the time you return from the riverbank, the sun has climbed high enough to turn every stone in the palace courtyard into a miniature stove. The air shimmers, and even the cats have given up their royal stalking routines, sprawled flat in the shade with expressions that clearly say, "Nope, not today." This is when the morning finally offers its mercy, a short siesta. Even pharaohs can't negotiate with the desert heat. You slip into a shaded room, draped with linen curtains that sway faintly in the breeze. The floor is cool beneath your bare feet, and the faint smell of lotus and sandalwood lingers from the morning oils. A servant brings a low wooden bed topped with woven mats and thin linen sheets. Another sets a small bowl of cool water beside you, just in case you wake parched. Historians still argue whether pharaohs slept flat on these beds, or half sitting against cushions for ventilation.
Fringe theories even suggest that certain naps doubled as ritual dreaming sessions, where messages from the gods might slip in. Basically, the original power nap with spiritual Wi-Fi. You lie down, and the palace quiets. The soft hum of insects outside replaces the morning's scribes and temple whispers. Somewhere distant, the Nile murmurs against the shore, and an occasional splash suggests either a fish or a crocodile deciding to mind its own business. Your eyelids grow heavy almost immediately. The breeze sneaks through the linen curtain, brushing across your oiled skin. You drift into that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, where thoughts swirl lazily. Boats, figs, a cryptic southern wind prophecy, and the possibility that your donkey neighbor is secretly judging your leadership. Fun fact, Egyptians often scheduled their work and ceremonies around the sun, with midday rest being practical and cultural. Fringe scholars have even speculated that some royal dream naps were documented if pharaohs woke claiming visions, turning an innocent doze into state news. You slip deeper, the heat pressing down like a heavy blanket, until all the noises blur, the distant river, the cicadas, even the muffled chatter of guards outside. For a brief, perfect moment, you are not a king or a god. You're just another human surrendering to the eternal rhythm of the Nile and the desert sun. When you wake, the world will smell faintly of fresh oil and clean linen again. But for now, the only commandment is to rest, because the second half of the morning will ask for the ruler's shine once more. You wake from your siesta to the gentle sound of a reed flute playing somewhere in the courtyard, its notes drifting lazily through the linen curtains. The room is cooler now, the harsh edge of the midday sun softened by the shade. A servant appears almost instantly, carrying a small jug of water and a folded fresh linen garment. This is the reset button for the rest of your day, a ritual refresh to shake off both the heat and the weight of whatever cryptic omens the morning dumped on you. First comes a quick rinse with cool water poured over your hands and face. The shock is gentler than the dawn's cold splash, and it washes away the sticky layer of sweat and dust that clung to your skin during your short nap. A servant pats you dry with a smooth linen towel, and then the real ritual begins, the oils. They bring a new selection this time, lighter scents to match the afternoon. One smells of sweet almond and fenugreek, another of blue lotus. They rub the oils carefully into your arms, chest, and legs, each motion slow and methodical. The faint sheen returns to your skin, catching little halos of sunlight that slip through the curtains. Historians still argue whether these midday oilings were purely cosmetic or part of a purification routine. Fringe scholars like to claim that these sessions doubled as subtle medical checks by attendants, since a glistening pharaoh was also an observed pharaoh. Next is the wardrobe refresh. Your morning linen, slightly rumpled from heat and napping, is replaced by a crisp, freshly pressed kilt that smells faintly of the reed smoke used to dry it. Another servant fits a broad collar of colored beads around your neck, cool against the skin. A soft sigh escapes you despite yourself. Being a living god has its perks, and one of them is never doing your own laundry. Fun fact, ancient Egyptians sometimes used cones of scented fat or wax in their wigs that would melt slowly in the heat, perfuming both hair and body. If you're imagining walking around smelling like a human candle, you're not far off. A new cone is placed discreetly in your wig, and the faint aroma of myrrh begins to drift upward.
Once the refresh is complete, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the polished bronze mirror again. Smooth skin, crisp linen, and the gentle glow of oil make you look every bit the ruler your kingdom expects to see. Fringe theories would suggest this is less about hygiene and more about the performance of divinity. If you sparkle in the sunlight, you must be touched by the gods. Your attendants step back with the silent satisfaction of a completed task. The heat outside is easing, and with your renewed linen armor and glossy skin, you're ready to face the more serious tasks of the late morning, which unfortunately include private discussions with generals, less figs and flowers, more armor and whispers.
The palace feels different after your refresh, cooler, calmer, and sharper, like you shed the lazy haze of the siesta along with your rumpled linen. A servant leads you into a shaded council room where two generals are already waiting. They kneel briefly, then rise with that perfectly balanced mix of respect and exhaustion known only to men who spent their lives under the Egyptian sun in bronze and leather. The room smells faintly of oil and desert dust brought in on sandals. A large papyrus map is spread across a low table, weighed down with small stones, carved to represent forts, boats, and, slightly alarmingly, tiny enemy soldiers. The Nile snakes across the map like a faded blue ribbon, and little dots mark villages, outposts, and irrigation channels. One general clears his throat and begins the day's updates. Minor skirmishes near the southern border, some nomads testing the kingdom's patience, and a minor delay in a stone delivery because, of course, a sandstorm buried half the workers' tools. Historians still argue how much real military strategy pharaohs engaged in personally. Some records suggest ceremonial oversight, while fringe theories imagine certain kings were hands-on, treating these meetings like the world's most stressful board game. The other general points to the Delta with his reed stylus, muttering about boat patrols and the importance of keeping river trade secure. You nod gravely, resisting the urge to wonder whether that donkey outside the palace could command the boats with equal authority. The generals, ever serious, do not laugh. Fun fact, Egyptian military life wasn't just about battles. It was also about maintaining labor forces, protecting supply lines, and occasionally flexing royal might to remind neighboring regions that the Nile kingdom didn't sleep. French scholars sometimes joke that these meetings were as much theater as strategy, a royal ritual to keep the generals feeling important and the pharaoh visibly in command. A servant pours cool water as the generals discuss the southern desert. You sip slowly, letting the cold trickle down while pretending to ponder the fate of distant nomads. Mostly, you're imagining the bliss of stepping back into the garden after this. The meeting winds down after a few formal decisions are noted. Yes to reinforcing one garrison, yes to sending a boat convoy downriver, and yes to the ceremonial letter that says, "The living Horus is always watching." The generals bow deeply and leave, their sandals whispering across the stone. Alone again, you let out a quiet exhale. Royal duty may demand gravity, but inside, you can't help feeling that half of your life is an endless scroll of meetings, approvals, and subtle acting. At least the next task is more pleasant, an afternoon stroll back to the balcony where the Nile's lazy gleam promises a brief escape from all this strategic seriousness. You step out onto the wide stone balcony, and the world opens up like a slow, exhaling breath. The Nile stretches before you, a strip of molten gold under the late morning sun. The air is warm, but no longer punishing, and a faint breeze drifts off the river, carrying the smells of wet reeds, clay, and the occasional fish that wishes it were further upstream. From up here, the palace feels like the center of everything. Farmers dot the fields like tiny moving beads, their white linen flashing against the dark, fertile soil.
A few water wheels creak steadily, lifting river water into channels that snake through the farmland. Historians still argue whether pharaohs regularly watched these daily labors or if balcony time was mostly ceremonial. Fringe theories suggest this casual observation doubled as a kind of performance, the king appearing in the sun to remind the world that he too sees and blesses their work. You lean against the stone railing, the heat of it seeping into your oiled forearms. Below, a cluster of palace workers carries baskets, probably filled with figs or lotus stalks for the kitchens. A distant heron swoops low over the river, landing in the shallows with a splash that somehow echoes up to you. The world moves slowly, like it knows the king is watching and wants to keep things appropriately dignified. Fun fact, balconies and open terraces were often designed to catch the Nile breeze, making them the pharaoh's personal air conditioning. Fringe scholars claim some kings gave subtle signals to attendants from here, like claps or gestures, triggering everything from music to garden watering to discreet reminders for more beer. As you watch, you notice two fishing boats crossing paths, their sails catching sunlight like enormous white wings. A dog barks from the riverbank, startling a flock of birds into a sudden whirl of movement. The scene is mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. For a moment, the stress of generals, scribes, and oracles melts away, replaced by the simple rhythm of water and wind. Leaning back, you feel a deep, almost lazy calm settle in your bones. This balcony is more than just a spot to look royal. It's a reset button, a private theater where the kingdom performs its endless cycle of life. And as you turn to leave, you can still hear the creak of the water wheels and the faint cry of that indignant river bird, reminding you that even in paradise, someone is always arguing with a fish.
You step back inside, the stone underfoot cooler than the sun-warmed balcony. By now, the palace hums with the easy rhythm of late morning, servants moving in measured steps, the distant clink of pottery, and somewhere the soft echo of a harp drifting down a hallway. The heavy ceremonial duties are behind you, and what remains is the winding down portion of the pharaoh's morning, a quieter, softer cadence before the midday lull fully settles in. A servant leads you to a shaded alcove where a light refreshment has been prepared. More figs and honey, a small cup of watered wine, and a dish of pomegranate seeds that gleam like tiny jewels. The seeds burst sweet and tart on your tongue, leaving that sticky tang that somehow makes the wine taste cooler. Fun fact, pomegranates were symbols of prosperity and rebirth, and some tombs included them as a little eternal smack for the afterlife. Fringe historians love to point out that nobles probably walked around spitting seeds onto palace floors, leaving some poor servant with a broom and a grudge. As you relax, the scribe from earlier appears with one last scroll. You suppress a sigh. It seems the kingdom always has just one more thing. This time, it's news from a border village, reporting a successful harvest and offering a small tribute of honey jars. You nod, pleased, and wave the scribe away, finally free of bureaucratic ambushes. The room is cool, the light filtered through slatted windows, and the faint hum of the outside world blurs into a soft backdrop. Historians still argue whether pharaohs truly had these extended quiet moments, or if every spare breath was filled with ceremonial obligations. Fringe theories imagine kings stealing moments of stillness whenever they could, like overgrown cats sunning themselves between rituals. A gentle drowsiness creeps in again, the combined weight of sun, wine, and a belly full of fruit. The palace seems to exhale with you, its walls whispering a slower rhythm now. Servants move like shadows, careful not to disturb the living god's retreat into calm.
The sounds of the palace soften, stretching and fading like ripples in a wide, still pond. The breeze from the Nile slips through the shutters, carrying the faint scent of river water, lotus blossoms, and sun-warmed reeds. Even the birds outside seem to sing more slowly, their calls drifting into the warm air, as if they too are getting sleepy. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the day melt into something quieter. The palace stones beneath you feel cool and grounding, the world reduced to gentle sounds, the sigh of linen curtains, the soft splash of a fountain in a shaded courtyard, the distant hum of life moving at the Nile's timeless pace. Your mind drifts back to the river, to the shimmer of sunlight on slow water and the lazy tilt of fishing boats. It's easy to imagine yourself floating there, carried effortlessly by the current, the edges of the world blurring into soft gold and blue. No meetings, no scrolls, no ceremonial bows. Just the hush of water and the lull of an endless horizon. Each breath feels slower, longer. Even the weight of the crown, the metaphorical and the actual, slips away. In this moment, the kingdom runs on its own, and you are free to sink into the warmth, the softness, the rhythm that has cradled Egypt for thousands of years. Let the final echoes of the morning fade, leaving only the steady, soothing hum of life along the Nile. Sleep, or simply rest here in the stillness, knowing that the river flows, the lotus blooms, and the world is at peace.